Welcome back to Toni Farmer's Garden, the podcast. I am very excited to introduce you all to someone I've learned a lot from because he was one of my professors when I got my master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania. Domenic Vitiello is a professor at UPenn's Weitzman School of Design and an expert on urban agriculture. So he was the perfect person to talk to about how two of these three factors that we discussed in the last two episodes are fueling our food crisis: cost and access. But don't worry, this isn't a sad episode. It's actually full of so much helpful information. If you live in a city or in an apartment anywhere and you are frustrated by all the garden content you see on social media, you might be saying, help, I can't grow a garden. What am I supposed to do? This episode is for you. But this episode's also really for everyone because at the heart of my conversation with Domenic is something we can all relate to and we're craving a little more of: community. We start by addressing something I hear all the time. People say to me, why can't we solve the food problem in cities by growing everything on rooftops? Just like we talked about with Maria Rodale, it's not that simple. Let's talk about it. Let's touch on rooftop gardens because every time they come up, everyone goes, well, this is the solution. Explain to us why not so easy to do.
Well, for a few reasons. One is that not all of us have access to a rooftop. We use rooftops for our heating and ventilation equipment and for other things. Often rooftops aren't that large if we do have access to them. It's also, in many ways, much more challenging to grow in pots, right, or away from the ground. And if people do have access to soil in the ground, there's really no better thing, partly for how much water you have to put on it, but also for the ability just to build healthy soil that worms and other wonderful microorganisms want to live in and improve for its fertility. That said, particularly if you can build or acquire large enough planters and maybe collect rainwater on your roof or bring up enough water, rooftop gardening or balcony gardening or even window gardening can be reasonably productive. People can grow a lot of things in small amounts of space, and oftentimes people can grow things that cost a lot in small amounts of space. So herbs, if you try to buy herbs at a grocery store, they cost a great deal of money.
$2.99 for a little bunch of rosemary.
A tiny sprig or two, right?
Talk to me about sweet potatoes for a minute.
Sure. Well, sweet potatoes are one of the more nutrient-dense sorts of foods that people grow. They're also very adaptable. You can grow them in cold climates, in hot climates.
Fairly pest-free.
Absolutely. You don't need inputs so much of fertilizers or pesticides. They're a relatively resilient plant that it's not bothered by a whole lot of either pests, as you say, or swings in temperature, and so they're very adaptable to all sorts of places. And while they might not cost a lot at the supermarket, they're really rich in a lot of different nutrients in ways that are wonderful for our diets.
They store well also.
Absolutely.
So you can eat them and you grow them all summer and you're eating them in January and February and they still taste really good.
Yes.
And vines too, so if you have a cute little apartment and you've got a big pot, those vines are gorgeous and they will grow up all over and you'll look like you're living in one of the gardens of
Babylon.
And my understanding is, I'll have to go back and check this, but they don't like to be cut. They prefer not to be pruned back. The difference being if you're growing them, I'm just going to add a little garden tip here. If you're growing them on the ground, you have the added benefit of where the vines hit the ground, they will create an adventitious root, and you can get sweet potatoes all along the vine, which drastically, by 10s and 20s, increases your harvest. Doesn't mean you shouldn't grow them in a pot, but you're only going to get potatoes in the pot. They're not going to grow sweet potatoes in the air on the vines. So it's just a trade-off.
Yes. I grow a ton of berries. And if you go, again to the supermarket and go to the berries section, the price points are high.
Well, let's try $6.99 for a little container of raspberries that is going to rot a day after you bring it home.
Yeah,
right?
and be careful if your car's too hot on the way home. Right?
Yes, but you can grow them.
Absolutely, and they're easy to grow too. Things like raspberries can grow across a very long growing season, especially if you mix different types that like to fruit in the spring and the summer and the fall. There's a tremendous amount of sort of replacement value in growing a lot of your own food, or even a little bit of your own food. If you think about simply what you would pay, right, at a store or at a farmer's market, which are often a higher price, for arguably better food oftentimes. If you're growing it yourself, you can pretty much rely on the fact that, or you can be confident that you know everything that's gone into it. You don't have to worry about fertilizers or other chemicals if you
growth inhibitors, all that kind of
absolutely. Or even the sorts of resins that people put on different fruits and sometimes vegetables just to make them able to travel thousands of miles to our grocery store shelves.
Apples and cucumbers have that waxy coating, and
Exactly.
an apple will most often I think sits for over a year in a refrigerated, I think I might have learned that from you, in a refrigerated unit before it ever makes it to the store, because it's fairly shelf stable, like in that circumstance. And then they dole them out when they need to. And you think you're buying a super fresh apple at Whole Foods or wherever. I'm not picking on Whole Foods, but you know what I mean. And if you grow them yourself, vastly different circumstances.
Absolutely, and if you're getting it at a supermarket, it's probably shiny, thanks to that resin, but also if you grow your own, it's important to recognize that your apples and other fruits and veggies are probably not going to be shiny or perfect. And I expect you talk with your listeners about this at times. If you're able to tolerate that, you'll also realize that they usually taste better because they're so much fresher, as you're saying. Some people have access to space where they can also store apples, potatoes, and sometimes other very shelf-stable or very sort of durable fruits and vegetables. If you can make yourself a root cellar, usually that means digging a hole inside of a building to create a very sort of stable temperature for those things that you might want to keep for months. The Amish in Pennsylvania are very famous for really wonderfully storing lots of foods, both through canning and preserving, but also through root cellars like that. And it tends to be root crops, right, like potatoes, but also apples are good for storing long.
There's a company or several companies that make units that you can bury in the ground in your backyard, and the reason you would do that is simply mice and critters.
Yes.
Because technically, temperature and storage wise, you could just throw lumber in there, or you could dig a hole and just throw some sand in there and throw your sweet potatoes and apples, and they would be preserved beautifully underground through the winter. But it just takes one family of mice, and you're done, and it's all gone. So
That's right. I think it's also worth talking about freezers. And a lot of people have an additional. Yeah, a lot of people have an additional freezer, so that they can extend their eating from their garden. There are a lot more fruits and vegetables that can be frozen without a lot of fancy preparation than many people recognize.
Give us some examples.
Green beans, right? You might think, oh no, they'll just turn mushy. If they're dry, don't put them in wet. They can be frozen just fine. There are also lots of things you can do to process and then freeze. And I would say that freezing is really the most widespread and in some ways, therefore the most important way that people extend their ability to eat from their garden, but across months when gardens are not productive in colder climates.
So this is going to feel unattainable for some. I want to point out that a box freezer for your basement is very different than going shopping for something for your kitchen, where the prices will be very high. Go to a secondhand place, get one with a big dent in it. It does not matter. It just has to work. And if you're in an apartment building, this is where I love community. I love it so much. Can you talk with the other folks in your apartment building? Maybe one of you has room for the box freezer and the rest of you chip in for the electricity bill and the cost of it, and maybe they get a little something extra for keeping it in their apartment, and then you all are able to share and freeze some things. So don't give up because you walked into Lowe's or Home Depot and saw a $2,000 box freezer. You can, and then also, this is sad, but restaurants are going under at a pretty fast rate. They will have that equipment sold at deep discounts. That's really good because they needed it. Shop those kind of locations.
I'd say also on the theme of collaboration and community, people's extended families can sometimes share a freezer and redistribute food. But also, during the COVID pandemic, people in lots of places around the United States and elsewhere revived an older tradition of community refrigerators.
I have never heard of that.
It's in some senses akin to a food pantry. It's a free distribution, but oftentimes it even helps cut down on stigma as someone will put a refrigerator out on the sidewalk in front of their house or their community organization or their community kitchen. And I think community kitchens are...
Plug it in outside.
Yeah, plug it in outside. And some people will put a lock on it and say it's open just these certain hours or days of the week. Okay. But much more typically, it's just a fridge that people walking by can open. If there's something there they want to take, great. Some community fridges are stocked very regularly, daily. Others less regularly, but they're one way that neighbors and friends and also community organizations collaborate with people to make food more available in the public environment, on the sidewalk. And people who get food from community fridges don't tend to, necessarily even see who's putting it there. And so they don't need to ask someone for the food or stand in line. And so for those reasons, it does cut down on stigma. But it just creates one more site where people can put food they're not going to use or food that they've rescued or gleaned from someone who's not going to use it and make it available to people who might want it or need it in a very flexible way.
The questions I'm going to get on that are, one is, how do I know someone didn't put something unsafe in there? Because people get very paranoid about that, like right down to Halloween candy, which has never been proven to be true, by the way. Or litigation. What if I eat something out of this and I get really sick?
We have in the United States what are called Good Samaritan laws that indemnify, meaning sort of hold blameless people who are giving away food for free. It's actually what protects food banks and food pantries from legal liability in that sense. And while you shouldn't give away rotting food, of course, nonetheless, people giving away food are protected by these laws. We can't guarantee that people won't put something inappropriate, in a fridge, but community fridges oftentimes have just a simple set of guidelines or rules on a piece of paper taped to the fridge that says, you're welcome to put something in here, but under these conditions, make sure it's healthy or make sure it's safe.
It's not rotting, or it's not.
Yeah, it's not rotting, or if it's packaged, make sure its package is not open, that sort of thing.
Let's say I walk past a community garden I think there's one down in Queens Village. It's lovely. I've walked by it many times. People might be really intimidated. How does your average person living in the city that sees that walk up? Should they do a web search first? Should they go meet somebody? They're going to worry about, do I have the skills? I don't know what I'm doing. Is someone going to teach me? Walk us through that.
Yeah, so in some cities, it can be very effective to do a web search and find options for community gardens and to find a plot or even just a community garden to get involved in their events or their collective gardening. In some cities, community gardening is a very collaborative endeavor. In Chicago, where I've done a lot of work, the majority of community gardens are places where people garden together and often also have their own plots, but don't just have their own individual spaces. They're growing together. In Philadelphia, we tend to have our own plots. We're pretty individualistic. But we have an old saying in Philadelphia that I don't think is a good thing at all, but to get a community garden plot, you have to know somebody who knows somebody. And that's really not a fair or equitable or navigable system for so many people. That said, there is lots of space in community gardens. Usually not.
Is there really?
Well, usually not in downtown gardens.
Okay.
Right. So
Like suburban?
Well, in suburban or urban edge gardens, and some of those are the gardens where you can get a lot of space.
Okay.
So on the edges of Philadelphia, we have our largest gardens, and they almost always have available plots, whereas you can spend years on a waiting list for a very small plot in a garden in a very dense neighborhood in the center of the city or around our downtown. And that describes a lot of other cities, right, where people have less access to space, living in neighborhoods with lots of apartments, not a lot of yards. But if people are able and willing to travel a little bit of distance, they can find both more space and more available space oftentimes.
So listeners, this has been a great tip. I didn't know this, and I love the notion that if you are in a city dweller and you've looked around and there's a waiting list for your local urban garden and you really want to get in on that, it may be a bike ride or a couple of subway stops to an area that they're not even filled. That will present challenges, right? Because we all know the best garden in the world is the one you're closest to.
Absolutely.
But this is an excellent option. Continue.
Yes. So I think the garden where I've gardened for about 26 years is a really good example of this. It's a place where you can rent as many plots as are available, and a plot is not 4 feet by 8 feet as one raised bed usually is. Our plots are 20 feet by 25 feet or so, and people grow at the scale of farming there.
This is inside the limits of Philadelphia, folks, he's discussing.
It is, yes. And again, I garden in a community garden that's about 6 acres, and it's only the third largest garden in Philadelphia. It's one of the 3 corners of the city, and there are gardens at the other 2 corners of the city that are even bigger, one that's 9 acres, one that's about 11 acres. And the one that's 9 acres is entirely flexible. It can get as big as people want because it's in a state park, and however many people sign up in the spring, right, they lay out that many plots.
What's the name of that one?
That's in Benjamin Rush State Park in
Benjamin
northeast
Rush
Philadelphia.
I will be looking that up. Great. Okay, interesting cultural. You showed me some gardens. I think there was a group of Vietnamese folks who had immigrated here, and not only were they growing a lot of food, but they were growing food from their culture that they had a harder time finding here.
Absolutely. That's another really important effect of gardening for many, many people is really access to heritage foods that are important for you, your family, your community, culturally, and for cultural preservation and reproduction, right? There's so many gardens and gardeners, right, who are really focused largely on that. If you're looking for a plot in a community garden and you see one in your neighborhood, I think it's important to look around to see if there are signs. Many community gardens have reasonably clear signs about how to contact gardeners if you want a plot. Others might not.
Or even trespassing, right? Like
Yes.
some will welcome you in, others are like, hey, don't come in here until we've checked you out.
That's exactly right. Some community gardens are entirely public space and may not be fenced, and anybody can walk through them. In the city of Seattle, community gardens may not be locked. People who are homeless sometimes will sleep in them. That can be a challenge for gardeners, but on the other side of that, people are not excluded from those spaces, and they're very welcoming by and large. I encourage people to talk with gardeners. Now, I've talked with thousands of community gardeners in my career, and incredibly few have been hostile or really not been willing to talk with somebody who wants to ask about a garden. So
Gardeners love to talk about their gardens.
Absolutely. Ask them about their plot. What are you growing?
And then try and get them to shut up.
Exactly. Make sure you have enough time to listen for an hour or two. I encourage you to, if it's your neighbors, right, talk with your neighbors about whether there's space, how are people gardening, what are they growing. My garden has about 100 different plot holders, and some of them are groups of people, not just individuals. And some of us have been gardening all our lives. Some people even went to agriculture school, but others are total novices, and those who ask questions, right, often get a lot of help. So I just encourage people to talk with other people in community gardens, whether you are a member of it and have a plot or not yet, and see what opportunities there are to get involved. Whether that means getting your own plot right away or not. Come to a volunteer day. Come to a harvest party. Community gardens are as much about community as they are about growing things. And a lot of people think community gardens are about growing food or flowers, but I think it's also really important to recognize that community gardens are about growing community and relationships, including relationships that help people find food and cook food and navigate the food environment in all sorts of ways that really go well beyond the garden. I'd also say it's really important to recognize that most gardeners build soil, and soil fertility, which is not something that's as easy to see with your eye, but it's one of the really important longer-term commitments we make as gardeners.
Amen to that. My first guest on the podcast was Maria Rodale, so we got into it. All right. So other options. Let's say prices at the grocery store go through the roof. Prices at the moment of this taping are sky high. Beef prices are 50 to 60% higher than they were a decade ago. Fruits and vegetables 40% higher and climbing. We're having access issues with coffee and tropical things that we have to import, partly because of tariffs and partly climate change. So what do you recommend to someone living in the city? Maybe they've found their little garden plot, but we can't meet all our needs. What would be some other food access, food storage, food issues you might want to address?
Yeah, protein is challenging. We've also talked a lot about eggs and sky-high egg prices in recent months. We can grow protein if we grow beans, yet that takes a little bit of time. Food banks have gotten a lot better in recent decades, about distributing a wider range of foods and a wider range of healthier foods, including sometimes meats, including sometimes cheeses and eggs and other proteins, as well as produce. Food banks used to, and the food pantries that distributed their food used to be very much knocked or criticized for distributing mostly relatively unhealthy foods, canned and boxed foods that are shelf stable but weren't as healthy for us as fresh produce and meats and other fresh foods.
Can you comment on access to that? So, for example, if I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, well, I make too much money to qualify for SNAP, not by much maybe, this person is thinking, and I don't think they're going to accept me. But I've volunteered at food pantries before where no one checked anything except they wrote down your email. So across the board, do you find most places you have to prove need, or can you just show up?
That depends on where you are, including which state you live in, because states have different laws about this. And they are shifting as well, as there is pressure from the federal administration today to institute more checks on people's income and their ability to pay. That said, there's still many community organizations on the ground that give out free food. There's been a growing set of organizations in regions across the United States that are gleaning food, meaning taking food that others are not going to harvest or sell and redistributing it. Sharing Excess is one of the big organizations in the Philadelphia region that's doing this work, but there are organizations across the United States and Canada and elsewhere in the world that have recognized there's a tremendous amount of waste in our food system. And if we can divert that waste quickly enough, whether it's fresh produce or meat or cheese or any other foods, if we can distribute it quickly enough to people, we can both cut down on waste and get food to people who need it. And so there are all sorts of distribution points, both traditional food pantries as well as community organizations On our campus at the University of Pennsylvania, we have student groups that distribute food from sharing excess because, as I expect you know, an increasing share of our students have become food insecure as more and more working class students have been welcomed into our university, which is great. But now we, like many universities, have a food pantry and have really important food distribution programs, right, to meet that need.
Is there stigma on campus, do you know? Like 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it was a great deal of stigma. I don't want to be seen at a food pantry. Are younger people, so our students' age, less concerned about that? Does the stigma still exist, or are they processing that?
Certainly the stigma still exists. The food hall across the street from my office, which used to be a less expensive food court and was very much sort of upgraded and gentrified.
Fabulous, by the way.
It's wonderful. You and I can afford to buy the, $12 sandwiches and sushi and so on there. But a significant percentage of our students can't and don't see those sorts of spaces as spaces for them. The entity on our campus that runs the food pantry, the Greenfield Intercultural Center, is a wonderful space for our students, and I think people generally feel welcome there. However, stigma still exists around all sorts of food relief or emergency food programs. And that remains very real for young people and older people as well.
When I took your class, I think we had a student, we visited Phil Abundance, because you were big on field trips, which I loved. I think we had a student doing an independent project on how to solve the banana problem, which was you get thousands and thousands of pounds of bananas, and you all know this, the minute the banana starts to turn, it's over. Like avocados in that category too. He had come up with, I cannot remember the project, I'll try and look it up before we make this public, but it was kind of this ingenious, you give me all the bananas that you can't give away or sell, I've got this product I'm making out of it. It was healthy, accessible, sustainable, and I don't know where he went with that, but I was so inspired. Listen, if you're an entrepreneur out there and you really want to make your mark on the world, figuring out part of our food waste problem will make you a rich and famous person at this point.
Absolutely, and really will solve the world's problems in many ways by closing ecological loops, meaning that we don't just throw waste out, but we reuse it, put it to good use for all sorts of things, whether that's feeding people, feeding animals, composting and to regenerate the nutrients into something else that we're growing, all sorts of options for food waste. I would point to my colleague at Drexel University and his work. John Deutsch, who runs the food lab at Drexel, is one of the world's experts in what we call upcycling, right? Reusing what would be wasted to be something that people really want. And he tells this wonderful story about really how he got into that with his students, and it's about bananas. He likes to ask people, well, what would you do with bananas? And everybody says, well, we make banana bread. Exactly. But how many bananas do you really need for banana bread? Not even a whole bunch. So what are you going to do with the rest of them? People have all sorts of ideas, and a lot of them are very sugary. A lot of them just wouldn't use that many bananas. What he and his students working in a shelter for homeless women and children and trying to produce good food out of food that was redistributed that would have been wasted, ultimately figured out was that making a sort of frozen banana whip, it's not really an ice cream, it's not that sweet, was a way to preserve bananas. If you have a freezer, you can keep that for a long time, made it shelf stable in that sense, right? At least, in not a dry shelf, but a frozen environment. And so it was a way to use tons of bananas, basically as many as you had, turned it into something that people enjoyed eating, including kids, but that was reasonably healthy for people and could be preserved.
This is one of the ironies of our food system, is that we don't even really grow bananas in the United States, not in the contiguous United States. We do grow them in Hawaii, nowhere near enough to meet our demand. So we import a ton of bananas, and then we waste most of them. And now here we are trying to figure out what to do with all our wasted bananas. I will address that in another podcast. All right, the last thing we'll end on here, if you have another minute, is, and it might be a hard question or easy, I don't know. I'm living in the city. I've been walking past an empty lot for 2 years. There's no fence around it. There's no hazard tape. There's weeds growing everywhere. No one appears to care. Can I just start planting stuff there?
Well, I think it's really important if you decide to do that to be careful about a few things. One is it's always important to look up who owns the property, and most cities have publicly accessible websites that will tell you who owns a property and will give you their address if they don't live on that property. That's usually in the agency that handles property taxes. In Philadelphia, it's the Office of Property Assessment. You can look up any property in the city, see who owns it, and try to contact them. That's ideal. If you can't find them, as in many cities, we have vacant lots where their owners are far away, might not even know they own the lot if they inherited it from someone distant relative and they live in some place far away.
It's called garden squatting, by the way. You just start a garden and hope no one notices.
Yes, and you have to realize that, in those cases, your hold on that land is very tenuous, and you may not be able to continue gardening there. You might even be interrupted during the middle of the growing season, which is probably always the most frustrating thing. So it's ideal to look up and try to talk with whoever owns it. You can also talk with local politicians, whether that's the block captain or the ward leader or the city council representative. Those people are often very much on top of who owns land and what are people using it for. And they can be great resources for trying to get access and some control of a site, whether permanent or short or long term. In Philadelphia, not just for the city, but for people in our region, we have a wonderful program called Garden Tenders at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society that really trains people first in the first phase of Garden Tenders, founded by one of the wonderful garden support professionals in the country, Sally McCabe. She walks people through in the first sort of phase one of Garden Tenders how to gain access to land and how to organize yourselves as a group of people to form a garden. And then it's only in phase two or part two of the Garden Tenders course that people talk about growing things and plants and seeds and soil. And so that first step of really organizing and getting access to space is important. The other thing that I think is essential for people to recognize and to do without fail, if they are gardening on a lot that they just come upon or that they don't know what was there before, and by before I mean really for its long-term history, is you should always test the soil. That does not have to cost a lot of money. It's usually your agricultural extension office, or if your agricultural extension office in your town or your state doesn't offer soil testing services, or if it looks expensive, look at another state. Oftentimes people in Philadelphia send their soil to Massachusetts, which is not far away. It's just send it in the mail, because Massachusetts Extension was charging us less than Penn State was.
And they've all got the same equipment. Exactly. It does not matter.
That's right.
I think my warning would be if you are using raised beds, somehow you can. I did my capstone on contaminant mitigation in urban gardens, and if you're using raised beds, you can control your soil. Much less to worry about. However, lead. Please test for lead, because if you have children and lead dries and drifts and it can drastically affect children neurologically, at least do a lead test if nothing else.
Absolutely.
This was an incredible conversation. I feel like we covered so much ground, yet in so much depth, and I think you may have helped some people gain access to food who didn't know they had access. And if we accomplish nothing else with this conversation, that's pretty great.
Well, thank you so much, Toni. It was a real pleasure, and I love what you're doing with all this.
Thank you. I will. Hopefully we will talk again down the road.
Anytime.
All right, so Klein, what's your question?
I live in an apartment in Philly. There's like a shared outdoor space next to the building, and it's not used much. And I was thinking this already, that I might reach out and be like, hey, can I start putting like beds in and stuff? If I'm starting from zero and I can't plant in the ground because it's all concrete.
Right. Common.
How do I make it so that the soil that I'm using, which I'm assuming I'm getting from some garden center, coming out of a bag, but you guys talked a lot about soil health. So how do I...
Klein, this is such a good question. Because so many people are wondering this question. So the good news is you can 100% do this with incredible success. And I also think there's going to be other people in your apartment building that are going to want to help you with this. The downside is it's going to cost a little bit of money because you are on concrete. And also I worry in the city a lot about contaminated soil, but we're not going to worry about that because we're going to use fresh soil. So I highly recommend, I work with this company called Vigo Gardens. You can get these raised beds a lot of places. I happen to have vetted their product. They mail them to you in a box. They take a few minutes to put together. They go together like Legos. And then you can control what you put in them. They're 17 inches high. So you really need about 12 inches of soil because most vegetables have about 12-inch roots by the end of the season. So if you can just get 13, 14 inches of soil in there, you've now got a whole garden that is completely safe. I don't care if there's concrete underneath, but your question was about soil health, and there's a fairly easy fix. So you go on the weekend to a local park or farm, or you're going to your mom's house, or you come to my house, or anyone you know that has property where you're allowed to get a couple handfuls, that's all you need, of healthy soil, because that has millions, billions of microorganisms in it. I'm not saying go to a public park with a spade. I'm just saying find a place where you can legally, it's just a baggie, like get a few cups, 8 to 16 ounces of soil. It will be wildly alive with microorganisms. Put it in there, and that's what I would call inoculating the soil that's sterile that you got from the store. And then this product that I talk about ad nauseum, everyone hears me talk about it all the time, is a biostim. And what that does is feeds the microorganism. So PT Booster's the one I use. There's many of them, but I've worked with them for a very long time and I've seen the results in my own garden. So here's what you're doing. You're getting sterile soil from the market, from the hardware store. And the reason it's sterile is because soil is alive with insects and bugs, and no one wants those bugs coming alive in their hardware store. So they sterilize the soil a great deal to transport it, right? Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So that it's nice and safe and fresh, but it's not alive. So, and then then most people would use synthetic fertilizers and things to feed it, and now you're setting up a system that is basically false.
Right.
So if you throw a couple handfuls of fresh, good soil, and I will give you some from my garden kind, and then you're going to put a little biostim in there, and then you'll get a little organic fertilizer, and you're off to the races. Yeah. You can grow so much food in this space,
right?
Even through the winter.
Right. And then I can compost, right?
You could get another one of these beds and throw leaves and garden waste and any of your food waste.
That's what I was, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself, but yeah.
I'm pretty excited about this project.
We'll see if it actually happens.
Let me see if I can get Vigo Garden to send you a free bed.
Let's
just get started. And
hi, I will use one of your beds. I will tell everybody. I will get all of Philadelphia. I don't have that much pull, but I'll try.
They're really cool looking. I have a bunch in my yard and I really like them.
Yeah, wait. Does a raised bed have to be because when I think raised bed, I think 5 feet off the ground?
No.
Just a container.
Remember, if you're on soil, it just needs to be 6 inches high is all, because you're planting in the ground. If you're on concrete, I really do want you to have 12 to 14 inches of soil, because otherwise at the end of the season, the roots will have reached down to the concrete. Not the end of the world.
But they won't be happy.
They're not thrilled. Yeah. They really want 12 to 14 inches of space there.
Mental health is important.
Mental health for our plants.
For our plants. And for us.
And are you going to talk to your plants?
Probably. I think so. That's perfect. I did say the other day I need to get a dog because I need something living to be there when I'm talking to myself.
Listen, everyone needs friends, Klein. Yeah. Everyone needs friends. I talk to my plants all the time. So, all right. Next time we chat about this, we're going to talk about what you're going to grow first.
Great.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I appreciate you tuning in and learning with me. I hope this was really helpful, and I'm excited about next week. Pros and cons here. The pros are the information is really, really good. We're going to talk to a food scientist. The cons are you're going to find out how much the food industry has been working against you to get you to eat junk food all this time. My hope is it actually makes you angry enough to change the way you eat. So tune in next week to hear food scientist Mark Hines talk about Bliss Point.